And so I was thinking, well, Abba, what would you want me to teach them, say to them? What would you want me to share with them on this day of Zikaron Teruah, Yom Teruah, Rosh Hashanah, whatever you prefer, whichever offends you the least? Okay, this holy day. And so I thought about what I wanted to share in terms of the Yamim Noraim, which is the days of awe, and the idea of preparing for the days of awe. I didn't really have a title in mind for this. I didn't even know how long this was going to go, so I don't know really yet until we start doing it. But I had a subtitle or a working title of Are You Listening? Because see, the days of awe are about us preparing ourselves for judgment. Not that literally he will be judging the earth necessarily on Yom Kippur, but we are preparing for a judgment. And so these are days and rehearsals to remind us about the idea of the fact that we are going to be standing before the judge at some point. And so it appeared to me that if he's judging us, he's going to judge us according to the covenant. The covenant is in Exodus 19 when he says, if you agree to obey and listen to what I say, then I will agree to take you as my people. That's the very simplicity of the covenant. And so my thought that came to mind was, are you listening? And so I don't know if I want to maybe do a much more expanded teaching on this at some point. But what I wanted to do is not so much a teaching, but I wanted to read a few passages, or some of them in terms of whole chapters here in Deuteronomy. In Deuteronomy. Because I think, in a sense, the Day of Trumpets leading into Yom Kippur is a lot like Moses speaking to the children of Israel, admonishing them going into the land. In other words, preparing them for what's coming. And so we're going to begin in chapter 4 of Deuteronomy, and I'm going to just read, and I'll probably stop every now and then and say something. So my notes is just reading from chapter 4, 5, 6, 8, and 10, and 30. So that already sounds like a long time, doesn't it? I read fast, so it's okay. Deuteronomy chapter 4. And so what I want to get out of this, well, let me rephrase that. What I want you to get out of this. I already put this together, so I already got out of this what I want you to get out of this. That's why I put it together. But what I want you to get out of this is I want you to hear the words of Moshe, and more importantly, the words of Yahweh through Moshe, in speaking to the people about their right mindset about two things. About where they came from, about where they are. So it's really three things: where they are and where they're going. So that they have the right heart and the right head in that moving forward process. Okay, that's what I'm looking for you to get out of this as we're listening to Moses and Yahweh speaking through Moses. Sometimes it's Moses speaking, sometimes he's speaking for Yahweh. As we read through these chapters, that's what we're looking for. What is he trying to tell us about appreciating where we came from, appreciating what he's done to get us where we are now, and then also appreciating where he's taking us and that whole process, okay? So beginning in chapter 4, and we're going to read just about all of chapter 4, a good chunk of it, beginning in verse 1. And now, O Yisra'eel, listen to the laws and the right rulings which I am teaching you to do, so that you live and shall go in and possess the land which Yahweh Elohim of your fathers is giving you. Now, in that verse is the context of everything. And you're thinking, Rabbi, if you're going to stop on verse 1, we're never going to get through all of this. Okay. But this is the context of everything. Okay, he says, look, and now Israel, listen to the connection. Listen to the laws, right rulings, which I'm teaching you to do, so that you live. See, the connection is between the Torah and life. Torah is life. Torah leads to life. Torah protects life. So he's connecting those things together. And then if you would listen, he says, listen to the laws. That's why I titled this, Are You Listening? Listen to the laws. So listening is not just obeying. Listening is not just doing mechanically. It's listening. Pay attention. Hear and understand why they're there, that they're there for what? I always believe that there's three things, right? Keeping you safe, blessing you really is what I usually say first. Blessing you, keeping you safe, and then changing you from what and who you are into what and who he is. that transformative element. So he says, listen to me, listen to the laws because they will lead to life. And then the next piece is, and if you do these things, you shall go in and possess. You see, this is the connecting piece between you, him, and that future we look forward to called the eternal kingdom or the forever community or whatever way you want to phrase it. So he's connecting all those dots. Listening, okay, listening to what? The law. Listen to the law, the teachings, the right rulings that I'm teaching you so that you do them, so that you live, and then you go in and possess. So you can't leave any of these pieces of the puzzle out. It doesn't work that way. You can't ignore the laws and then live and think you're going into the kingdom. Or you can't listen to the laws, but then don't live by them and then think you're going to go in. And you can't skip the first two parts and just think you're going in. You're going to have to listen. You're going to have to do. And by the way, the underlying word there is the idea of Shema. Okay? And we're going to hear that all throughout, the idea of guarding, watching over. This is all, root word is Shema or Shamar. It's all from the Shema root. And he says here, I want you to listen so that you live and you possess, and you go in and possess. And of course, the other element is, he didn't say the Ruach is going to do all this for you and teach you everything. He says, listen to what I am teaching you. Listen, Israel, Yahweh called me to speak to you and teach you. You know, we are all, in the Jewish community, all referred to Moses as Moshe Rabbeinu. Moses, our teacher, our rabbi. So he's thought of as the highest level that has ever been reached as teacher, other than, obviously, Messiah Yeshua, but this is the Jewish community. So of those who are born of the flesh and only of the flesh, Yeshua was born in the flesh, but was not only of the flesh, Moses is that highest element of teacher. That's what he's thought of as Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses our teacher, our rabbi. And so he's saying, look, listen to those things, the laws, the right rulings that I am teaching you to do so that you live and go in and possess. Don't add or take away, verse 2. Don't add to the word which I am commanding you. Do not take away from it, so as to guard the commands of Yahweh your Elohim, which I am commanding you. So not adding and not taking away is a form of guarding what was actually said. Your eyes have seen what Yahweh did at Baal Peor, for Yahweh your Elohim has destroyed from your midst all the men who followed Baal Peor. But you who are clinging to Yahweh your Elohim are alive today, every one of you. So remember what I told you. He's going to start giving them perspective. This is where you guys were. This is some of the mistakes some people made. But you are here because you made a different choice, different decision. You clung to Yahweh. That making sense? All right? That's why the teaching that we did called cling, cleave, and hold fast is so important. Also, the one on making decisions is the reason you exist is so important, because they made different decisions. They chose to cling instead of going after Baal Peor. He says, so because of that, you are alive here today, every one of you. He says, see, I have taught you laws and right rulings as Yahweh my Elohim commanded me to do thus in the land which you are to go to possess. So these are to be done to get you through life today, to get you into the land, and to be done in the land. So make no, bones about it, or whatever the word you want to throw in there. Have no qualms about it. Torah is going to be kept in the forever. It is designed and meant to be done now. It was meant to be done in the past. It's meant to be done in the future. It's meant to be done forever. He says, verse 6, and you shall guard to do them, for this is your wisdom and your understanding before the eyes of the peoples who hear all these laws, and they shall say, only a wise and understanding people is this great nation. So he's telling you it's wisdom and understanding to do everything that Yahweh has spoken through Moses. This is wisdom, and that the nations would see that. See, right now, the nations are just seeing you as peculiar. Right? You're supposed to be a peculiar nation. But ultimately, they're going to see that there is wisdom and understanding in your choices and decisions to observe and keep and submit to the authority of Yahweh. And they're going to say, only a wise and understanding people is this great nation. Now notice it says wise and understanding. So you're supposed to not only have wisdom, but you have to have understanding. By the way, this is where the Chabad came up with their name. Their name is actually an acronym, Chachma, Bina, and Da'at. Okay, so you have wisdom, and you have knowledge and understanding. So you have those three together. And so they understood that from these verses, that they're supposed to have wisdom and knowledge and understanding. Wisdom, knowledge, and understanding. Chokhmah is wisdom. Bina is understanding. Dad is knowledge. Dad is knowledge. Okay? I named my daughter, her Hebrew name is Bina. I was hoping. I'm kidding. She's wonderful and she has tremendous understanding. But that's the thing, is that you name children with what you hope them to grow into, what you hope they will have. And so we gave her the Hebrew name Bina. Continuing, he says, for what great nation is there which has Elohim so near to it as Yahweh our Elohim is to us whenever we call on him? Does anybody have anything like that? Are there any pagan deities that are nations that have that are like that? Absolutely not. He says, and what great nation is there that has such laws and righteous right rulings like all this Torah, which I set before you this day? If you read Deuteronomy, and even just here in chapter 4, how do you come up with the Torah is awful, it's the laws that are against you, it needed to be nailed to the cross, we're glad we got rid of that stuff? How do you come up with that? When it's supposed to be in the future that the world, the goyim, the nations are supposed to notice and say, what other nation has what you guys have? These great, listen to what he says here. What great nation is there that has such laws and righteous right rulings like all this Torah, which I set before you this day? Nobody. Only Israel. Now, of course, they can choose to come and join us. That's what he's saying here. Only guard yourself and guard your life diligently, lest you forget the words your eyes have seen, lest they turn aside from your heart all the days of your life. And you shall make them known to your children and your grandchildren. Interestingly, he said, lest you forget the words your eyes have seen. The words your eyes have seen. In other words, you've heard the words and you've seen the fruit. You've seen the words in action. You see what happens when you obey. You've seen what happens when you don't obey. He said you've seen the word in action. And he said, look, guard yourself and guard your life. Diligent. Why your life? Because he told us in verse 1 that this is so that you live. He says, guard your life lest you forget the words your eyes have seen. Lest you turn aside from your heart all the days of your life. So these words, remember, are supposed to be in your heart. We just spent 30 days doing the Vahafta, and we're going to read that today as part of this here. In Deuteronomy 6, 5 through 9, it says, and these words shall be in your heart. So it's very important that we have them in our heart. And then we're going to make them known to our children and grandchildren. So this is the Vahafta right here again. And you shall impress them upon your children. He says, the day when you stood before Yahweh your Elohim in Horeb, Yahweh said to me, assemble the people to me, and I make them hear my words, so that they learn to fear me all the days they live on the earth, and teach them to their children. Now, why would he instruct you to teach them to your children? Because if it's for you to live by, it's for them to live by. These are the words that bring life. Don't you want your children to live? Of course you do. He says, and you came near and stood at the foot of the mountain, and the mountain burned with fire to the heart of the heavens, darkness, cloud, and thick darkness. And Yahweh spoke to you out of the midst of the fire. You heard a voice of words, but saw no form. You heard only a voice. And he made known to you his covenant, which he commanded you to do, the 10 words, and he wrote them on 2 tablets of stone. By the way, in verse 12, the beginning, he says, he spoke to you out of the midst of the fire. Remember the teaching we did called baptism of fire. What was fire to represent? Trials, testing. And so when you are in your fire, if you would only listen, he will speak to you out of the midst of the fire. That's what that teaching was all about, is understanding the true meaning of baptism of fire. So in your trials, testings, and provings, those wonderfully fun times of life, when we're miserable, frustrated, panicking, and afraid, if you would just be still and see the deliverance, as he told Moses when they were stuck there between the rock and the sea, and the Egyptians behind them, then you would be able to hear the voice speaking to you in the midst of the fire. See, the beautiful picture is there even at Mount Sinai when they were receiving the 10 Commandments, the 10 words. Verse 14, and Yahweh commanded me at that time to teach you laws and right rulings for you to do them in the land which you pass over to possess. So again, there was supposed to be those teaching. Therefore, diligently guard yourselves, for you saw no form when Yahweh spoke to you at Horeb out of the midst of the fire, lest you do corruptly, and shall make for yourselves a carved image in the form of any figure, the likeness of male or female, the likeness of any beast that is on the earth, or the likeness of any winged bird that flies in the heavens, the likeness of any creature that creeps on the ground, or the likeness of any fish that is in the water under the earth. Unless you lift up your eyes to the heavens, and shall see the sun and the moon and the stars, all the host of the heavens, and you shall be drawn away into bowing down to them and serving them, which Yahweh your Elohim has allotted to all the peoples under the heavens. So what's going on here? Again, he uses this word diligent. Diligent. He doesn't want you to put in, half an effort, 20% effort, 80% effort. He wants diligence. Diligence means not only being aware on a surface level, but being very consciously aware so that you make sure that you don't miss anything, that you're on top of things. You understand diligence, hopefully. He's not asking you to do this in a complacent way, half-hearted way. He wants you to be diligent in guarding yourselves. Notice he didn't just say diligent in guarding the commandments, but in guarding yourself. Because if you don't have your heart right, you're not going to keep and observe the commandments anyway. So guard and watch yourself. And he says, and be careful that you don't start looking at other things as Elohim, other things that having authority that is his authority alone. Verse 20, but Yahweh has taken you and brought you out of the iron furnace, out of Mitzrayim, to be his people, an inheritance as it is today. I think that is part of the metaphor, the type and shadow, whatever you want to use term-wise, of coming out of Egypt and what we're coming out of now, the greater exodus that is coming soon, hopefully in our future. I don't know how soon. I see a lot of people online making all kinds of teachings like it's going to be next week. It's not going to be next week. By the way, today is September 21st. I'm not worried about September 23rd. It's only 2 days from now. And it's going to be a Sabbath. And it's going to be 2 days from now. And then guess what? After that is September 24th. And then 5th, and then 6th. But yet everybody's hyping and hyping and hyping and hyping. But I do know, as he says here, is that this is telling us that we are supposed to think of ourselves like we are those people coming out of Egypt. We're going to have a verse that we're going to read that actually says that. And it's a verse that's quoted in the Haggadah, which is the book that we go through, the little book that we go through when we do the Passover. And it's in that, it's in that order of service. It says that you are to think of yourselves as if you were those that came out of Egypt. That's supposed to be our mindset that we think about it. Guess what? He says here, maybe you can relate. He says, because Yahweh has taken you and brought you out of an iron furnace. Anybody feel like they were brought out of an iron furnace? Anybody have some life experiences, feel like he's rescued you and delivered you out of an iron furnace? Your own personal Mitzrayim you've been struggling and dealing with? And he's been doing this, why? So that you would be his people, an inheritance as it is today. And Yahweh was enraged with me because of your words and swore that I would not pass over the Yarden, and that I would not enter the good land which Yahweh your Elohim is giving you as an inheritance. For I am to die in this land, and I am passing over the Yarden, but you are passing over and shall possess that good land. Guard yourselves, lest you forget the covenant of Yahweh your Elohim, which he made with you, and shall make for yourselves a carved image in the form of whatever Yahweh your Elohim has forbidden you. Again, guard that covenant. Don't forget the covenant that you made. Because remember, the first couple of commandments start off with, I am Yahweh your Elohim, who brought you out of the land of Mitzrayim, out of Egypt. You shall have no other Elohim before me, and you shall not make an image and worship it as Elohim. Verse 24, he says, the reason for all this is because Yahweh your Elohim is a consuming fire, a jealous El, and the word there in Hebrew is much more zealous to enforce, or zealous to keep what he has put forth, not so much jealous. Jealous is a very sort of low-level human emotion. And so in other words, he has commanded and he is zealous to keep what he has said. So if you break, you're going to get the curses. He's not going to withhold his hand. And if you do and honor, he's going to bless and he's not going to withhold his hand. You can expect blessing and cursing to be meted out with equal diligence. He promised it, you would receive what you have basically merited through your behavior. It says, Yahweh will not be mocked. You will reap what you sow. Let's continue. Verse 25, when you bring forth children and grandchildren and shall grow old in the land and shall do corruptly and make a carved image in the form of whatever and shall do what is evil in the eyes of Yahweh your Elohim to provoke him, I shall call the heavens and earth to witness against you on that day that you soon completely perish from the land which you pass over the Jordan and possess. You do not prolong your days and in it, but are completely destroyed. He's saying, look, this is not a joke. This is not a game. If you're about to cross into the Jordan, over the Jordan, you're crossing over as a nation under covenant. A nation in covenant. And he said, look, I'm calling the heavens as a witness against you. If you go and you don't do these things correctly, he's going to destroy you out of that place. And Yahweh shall scatter you among the peoples, verse 27, and you shall be left few in number among the Gentiles where Yahweh drives you. That is where we are today. Why? Because they did exactly what they were told not to do. They received as he promised they would. Why is it that we seem to think that we're not going to receive as he promised we will? Oh, but you know, in Christianity, we were told that all that was done away with, so there was nothing to fear with all that. I wouldn't bank on it. That would be not wisdom, that would be foolishness. And fools are talked about quite a bit in Scripture, just like those who are wise. And so he says here, they were scattered for disobedience and for not guarding their lives and guarding the covenant in their heart. You know what? Don't think you're going to be regathered or gathered from those places if you're not going to behave any differently than they did. If you're going to do what they did to get scattered in the first place, why do you think he's going to then bring you back? And, he could have just left them there and just left them. Why'd he scatter them? He scattered them for breaking the law. Obviously, the law is the problem, so let's get rid of the law, then everybody's fine. That's the illogic of it all. And Yahweh shall scatter you. Verse 28, and there you shall serve mighty ones, the work of men's hands, wood and stone, which neither see nor hear, eat nor smell. But from there, listen, this is the good news, but from there you shall seek Yahweh your Elohim, and shall find when you search for him complacently, casually, every few minutes here or there. It says, when you search for him with all your heart and with all your being. So some of you are frustrated because you don't seem to be finding him. Are you doing it with all your heart and with all your being? By the way, what does all your heart and being mean? It's not talking necessarily just about the level of effort. It's not just talking about the physical effort. It's talking about the purity and integrity of the effort. Are you seeking to find him as he is? Or are you trying to find a way to have him be what you want him to be? Are you trying to mold him into the image you have in yourself about him? Or are you trying to get in line with the image that he already has, with who he really is? So you got to seek him with all your heart, with all your being. In your distress, when all these words shall come upon you in the latter days, then you shall return to Yahweh your Elohim and shall obey his voice. Remember I said, are you listening? He's saying that if you would listen in verse 1 of chapter 4, then you wouldn't end up in the scattering in verse 27. But then if you would be willing to listen, come verse 28, 29, and 30, and hear his voice, he will then regather you. When? In the latter days, then you shall return to Yahweh your Elohim and shall obey his voice. For Yahweh your Elohim is a compassionate El. He does not forsake you, nor destroy you, nor forget the covenant of your fathers, which he swore to them. For ask now of the days that are past, which were before you, since the day that Elohim created man on the earth, and ask from one end of the heavens to the other, to the other end of the heavens, whether there has been a word as great as this, or has been heard like it. Has a people heard the voice of Elohim speaking out of the midst of the fire as you have heard and lived? Now remember, those that heard and listened and took action, the Shema, they lived. A lot of people heard and didn't do the rest of it. They didn't listen. Because I've had people say to me when I've talked to them over the years, I said, did you hear what I said? Yes, I heard. I said, well, yeah, but you weren't listening. Listening is different than hearing. Because if you had listened, you would have taken the action that was in my words, that my words required of you. My words were expecting there to be some sort of response or action. Anybody have that experience when you talk to people? They heard you, but they weren't listening. The sound went in their ear. They actually heard the words. But that's the whole thing is, are we listening? He said, here, look. He said, they will come and return to Yahweh, and they shall obey his voice. They're going to listen this time. For Yahweh, your Elohim, is compassionate. He does not forsake you, nor forget the covenant that he made with the forefathers. Verse 32, for ask now of the days that are past, which were before you, since that day the Elohim created man on the earth, and asked from one end of the heavens to the other, and the end of the heavens, whether there's been such a great word. In other words, how can you look at the Torah in these verses this way and then claim that somehow it's this awful, horrible thing that was a burden even our forefathers couldn't do, blah, 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 which is not what that verse says anyway. Are we to think that whoever is claiming that that's what Shaul or whoever in the New Testament is saying overrides what Yahweh is saying through Moshe? Because I think that if you even hinted that to Shaul, he would be so offended that anybody would think that he would disrespect Moshe. He says, but ask not just around other countries or other towns, from one end of the heavens to the other, whether there is such a word as great as this or has been heard the like of. Has a people heard the voice of Elohim speaking in the midst of the fire like you heard and lived? Or has Elohim tried to go and take for himself a nation from the midst of a nation by trials, by signs, by wonders, and by battle, and by a strong hand and an outstretched arm, and by great fearsome deeds according to all that Yahweh your Elohim did for you in Mitzrayim before your eyes? You have been shown it to know that Yahweh himself is Elohim. There is no one beside him. From the heavens he let you hear his voice to instruct you. And on earth he showed you his great fire, and you heard his words out of the midst of the fire. And because he loved your fathers, therefore he chose their seed after them and brought you out of Mitzrayim with his presence and with great power, to drive out from before you nations greater and stronger than you, to bring you in, to give you their land as an inheritance as it is today. How awesome is our Elohim? But we don't react like, I see people panicking over, well, I might lose my job if I have to stand up for keeping a holy day. I might lose my job if I stand up for Sabbath. My family's going to be mad at me if I don't eat whatever they put in front of me. How big are you impressed with your heavenly Elohim, or are you going to be putting power and authority? This is idolatry, really, on your bosses and family members and friends who you're giving power. Because really you're allowing them to be Elohim in your life. But he did all these signs. Has he not done signs and wonders in your own life? Do we really have to go there? Every one of you has a testimony. Every one of you has signs and wonders in your life that you have experienced, that you are well aware of, but so easily forget when tribulation comes, when the fires come. He's saying, he speaks to you in the midst of the fire. Don't be afraid of the fire. As a matter of fact, you want to hear from him, and then the fire comes, say, great, now he's going to talk to me. I better be listening. Instead of whining about the fire, get excited about the fire, because now, hopefully, he's gotten your attention enough that you're ready to listen, so he'll talk to you. And then he'll speak to you out of the midst of the fire. But are you listening? Are you actively ready to listen? Are you listening? Most of us, sadly, are not. Where did I leave off? Verse 37. And because he loved your fathers, therefore he chose their seed after them and brought you out of Mitzrayim with his presence and his great power to drive out. Now listen, all of that there in verse 37, 38 is to say, don't get all full of yourself thinking it's about you. He's doing this because of what your forefathers did and what he promised them. But that's why you're supposed to now take what you understand and teach it to your children and the grandchildren and etc. Verse 39. And you shall know today and shall recall to your heart that Yahweh himself is Elohim in the heavens above, and on the earth beneath there is none else. And you shall guard his laws and his commands, which I command you today, so that it is well with you and your children after you, so that you prolong your days on the soil which Yahweh your Elohim is giving you for all time. I mean, that's the bottom line right there. He says, you shall know today and shall recall to your heart who Yahweh is and how awesome he is and that there's no other authority. And then you shall guard his laws and his commands that I'm commanding you today. You shall guard them. Watch over them. Remember them. You know, we spent this whole teaching on remember. Well, actually, we just called it Shabbat. But in there, we're talking about guarding and remembering Shabbat. Very important that we understand this idea of guarding. There's nothing casual about guarding. Would you like to know that, let's say you hired somebody to stand guard over your house, and they were taking it real casually and, maybe kind of, daydreaming or sitting down and closing their eyes, putting their hat over their eyes, kind of like in the old Western, you see the guys take their hat until, would that be the kind of guard you'd want to pay to watch over your house? Or would you want that one standing there, strong, eyes looking back and forth, paying attention, aware, awake, alert? Nothing's getting past that person? Is that the kind of guard you might want? Are you that type of guard over the Torah? Over his laws, his right rulings? Are you awake? Are you diligent? Are you aware? Are you paying attention for dangers, things that threaten your Torah observance? Because I think more than that, we tend to watch over our boss's interests, our family members' interests, our friends' interests, all kinds of everybody else's interests. But see, in this case, if you watch over Yahweh's interests, guess what? That's actually in your best interest. So you're really doing something that's going to be self-serving in some ways. Serving him with all your heart, might, being, etc., is the thing that brings the most blessing to you. And he says it to you over and over again. He says, yes, I'd like you to look at yourself for a second and want and desire everything. Do what I tell you and you get everything. I've told my children this when we go on vacations. You can ask them. I have said to them at the very beginning of a vacation, I have said, if you will just follow my instructions on this vacation, it will be the best time you've ever had. But I need you to tell me right now that I'm telling you in the front, so I don't want you to be all surprised when you have a miserable vacation if you don't listen. If you will listen and trust me that I want you to have this is the idea now. The child is trusting the parent. When I say, trust me that it's my desire that you have the best life experience. That's what your Father in heaven is saying. If you would trust me that I really want you to have joy to overflowing, abundance to overflowing, peace and shalom in every aspect of your life, all you need to do is listen. But then you see the fire coming and you're not trusting him to provide what he's promised. He says, if you'll just trust me and listen to me, I promise you everything will be fine. And I've told that to my children. And so they know that. And you can ask them. And they'll tell you, when they have listened, they've had the best experiences. When they don't, it doesn't go so well. And so this is, and not because of me necessarily, because whatever they do can cause them all kinds of distress. We cause most of our own problems. We're people that loves to blame Hasatan and demons and everything for all of our problems. Listen, you can cause almost every problem you have without any help from any outside source. Stop giving the outside sources all the credit for all your problems. Because if you don't take ownership of your issues, you'll never fix them. I've told you this over and over again. Hasatan's an opportunist. If you don't give him the opportunity, he has nothing to work with. So whatever you suffer from, look in the mirror first. Don't just start blaming spiritual issues and demons and everything else. You got to deal with you first. You opened that door. You gave them that opportunity. You need to close that door and shut down the opportunity. Wow, that one chapter took half an hour. Let's go to chapter 5. I only have a few verses here. I'm going to have to cut out a lot of this, I think, or continue this another week. All right. Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 22. We're not reading only but 7 or 8 verses here. Deuteronomy chapter 5 and verse 22. So we just had the 10 commandments recounted here. He's talking about when they were there and they got to hear the commandments. And we get to verse 22. He says, these words Yahweh spoke to all your assembly in the mountain from the midst of the fire of the cloud and of the thick darkness and a loud voice, and he added no more. And he wrote them on 2 tablets of stone and gave them to me. And it came to be when you heard the voice from the midst of the darkness, whilst the mountain was burning with fire, that you came near to me, all the heads of your tribes and your elders, and said, see, Yahweh our Elohim has shown us his esteem and his greatness, and we have heard his voice from the midst of the fire. Today we have seen that Elohim speaks with man and he lives. And by the way, he's not just saying that man lives, but he says that Yahweh lives. Elohim actually lives. Because remember, they came from a place where it was stone, wood, and other things, and there was no life in it. But we're saying we actually come to realize Elohim really lives. We heard a voice. We heard all this stuff. We saw the thunderings, the lightnings. I mean, it wasn't just a piece of rock or a piece of wood. He says, and now why should we die, for this great fire is consuming us? If we hear the voice of Yahweh or Elohim anymore, then we shall die. For who is there of all flesh who has heard the voice of the living Elohim speaking from the midst of the fire as we have and does live? You go near and hear all that Yahweh or Elohim says, and speak to us all that Yahweh or Elohim says to you, and we shall hear and do it. Okay, so let's stop there for a second. So first of all, I want to bring out that in verse 23, it didn't just mention the fire, it also mentioned that the voice came out of the midst of the darkness. So Yahweh's going to speak to you also when you find yourself in the midst of darkness. Okay, when it gets really dark, you know what? Have anticipation of the excitement of knowing he's going to speak. He's going to lead you to something that's going to be very powerful, and it's going to bring light. It's going to bring life. But then he says, so they're panicking here, and he's saying, you teach us, otherwise we're going to die. So what I believe they were looking for here was plausible deniability, where they could say, well, you know, Moses said it, we didn't know it really came from you, because if it came directly from his voice, there's no arguing, denying that they heard it. But you notice that they're also saying that even if you gave us the Ruach, and the Ruach was teaching us, we would only want to hear what we want to hear. And so he gave Moses the job to teach, and we're still that way. We have people that I even spoke to a leader today who called me about the fact that he's got a group of people who don't want to come to services. They want to interpret the verses to say that they're only supposed to stay in their tent because that way they don't have to listen to anybody. Now, that's not what they're saying, but that's what they're saying. They're claiming, well, Scripture tells us not to leave. No, you're only using that as an excuse because you don't want to listen to anybody. You don't want to be under authority. You don't want to be corrected. You don't want to have instruction from anybody. Oh, no. We're going to meet with the Ruach, and the Ruach is going to teach us. Which Ruach? The Ruach of man, the Ruach HaSatan, because the spirit of man, spirit of HaSatan, and the spirit of Elohim. See, you need an anointed appointed to make sure you're hearing the right voice, to help hold your feet to the fire, so to speak, and keep you on the path. That isn't happening by yourself in your house. See, but they're doing the same thing right here. So whoever's doing that now, you're not new. This is nothing new. This isn't your idea. You didn't come up with this. The people in general did not want to hear directly, because from directly comes responsibility for what you heard. But see, if you found yourself an anointed appointed, it is coming directly. Your job is to find someone who's getting it directly. But didn't David have that problem? Didn't Saul have that problem? Saul was told by the prophet, you make sure you kill everybody and the animals and everything. And he didn't do it. And then the prophet came back and said, Yahweh's mad at you. Well, not because you didn't listen to me, but because when I spoke, you weren't listening to him. Moses is saying the same thing. When you don't listen to me, you're not listening to him. And so, well, they didn't want to listen to Yahweh. So they said, oh, well, we'll come listen to you. And you know they did a great job of listening to Moses, right? Oh, they didn't complain or whine after this point at Mount Sinai. No complaints. They just did whatever Moses said. I don't think so. So then Yahweh, listen now, Yahweh in verse 28, heard the voice of your words when you spoke to me, and Yahweh said to me, I have heard the voice of the words of this people, which they have spoken to you. They have done well in all that they have spoken to you. That verse ever bother anybody? They have done well saying all of this? That doesn't make any sense. Well, you know, the Hebrew word there is much better translated. It's actually a combination of letters and added on to, prefixes, suffixes of the word. It's actually better translated as, I have accepted what they have done. The root word has to do more with acceptance. So he's saying is, I heard what they said, and I have accepted that that's what they feel. I have accepted that that's where they are, and so I will work with you, Moses. I'm not saying it was right what they did. I'm saying that they told the truth about where their heart was at. I accept that that's where they're at. Does that verse make more sense now? So he says here, again, Yahweh heard the voice of your words, and he said, I have heard the voice of the words of this people, which they have spoken to you, and I accept that that's what they really feel, that they're just not ready to hear from me directly. Their hearts are not right. Are you listening? Is your heart right to hear from him and hear what he says and receive it and then put it into action? Are you ready for that? He says, listen now, in verse 29, how do I know that my interpretation of 28 is correct? Listen to verse 29. Oh, that they had such a heart in them to fear me and to guard all my commands always, so it might be well with them and with their children forever. So he wasn't saying that it was good that they said, oh, we don't want to listen to him, we want to rather listen to you. He's saying, I accept that they weren't ready because their heart's not right. Verse 29 proves that. See, sometimes you just have to go one more verse. Because if he said that they spoke well and I'm glad and happy about what they said, why would he say verse 29? But verse 29 makes perfect sense if you understand that he was saying, I accept the reality that they're not ready. I accept that they're still fleshly, they're still self-focused, they're not trusting, they're not fearing me, they're fearing other things. They have not become clay in my hands, they're still self-sovereign. But oh, that they would have such a heart in them that they would just fear me. Let me speak to them directly. He would love to teach us all just through the Ruach, but we won't listen. We won't listen. So what's the best way to keep us unaccountable? To just claim we're listening to the Ruach. And by the way, go out there and look at all these ministries claiming to just listen to the Ruach. Are they all on the same page? Do they all see things exactly the same? How is that possible? Is the Ruach confused? Is the Ruach divided? Apparently, they're not all listening to the same Ruach. Or maybe it just doesn't work that way. Because I don't see anywhere in Scripture where it works that way. He's always working through people. The Ruach is there to help you to recognize when you're hearing Yahweh through people. Let's continue. Let's go to chapter 6. Okay, we're going to go quickly here. And this is the command, the laws, and the right rulings which Yahweh, your Elohim, has commanded to teach you to do in the land which you're passing over to possess. See, there's supposed to be teaching and instruction so that you do what? So that you fear Yahweh your Elohim to guard all his laws and his commands, which I command you, you and your son and your grandson, all the days of your life, and that your days be prolonged. Now listen. The fear of Yahweh teaching, you're going to have to go through it again and again and again and again until you actually fear him. I know it was easier when it was one part. Now it's 7 or something. But this is everywhere in that relationship. If you're not fearing him, nothing else is going to happen. Or let's just say nothing good is going to happen. Nothing correct is going to happen. He says here that he's teaching you to do these things so that you fear him. And if you fear him, then your days will be prolonged. And then following this immediately, he says, Shema Yisra'ЄL. Yahweh Eloheinu, Yahweh Echad. He says, and you shall hear, verse 3, O Israel, and guard and do, that it might be well with you, and that you increase greatly, as Yahweh your Elohim of your fathers has spoken to you, in a land flowing with milk and honey. And then you shall Shema, O Israel, Yahweh is your Elohim, Yahweh is one. Do we not think of, when we do things his way and when he's actually blessing us, that it's like living in a land full of milk and honey? Not that you actually like milk or honey, but I'm just saying it means abundance and sweetness and joy. Land overflowing with these things. And he says in verse 5, and you shall love Yahweh your Elohim with all your heart, with all your being, with all your might. And these words which I am commanding you today shall be in your heart, and you shall impress them upon your children, and speak of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up. And you shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes, and you shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. So he's trying to explain to you what you need to do so you have the right focus, the right fear, and so that you can actually Shema. You can listen and take action. Listen and do. Hear and do is what Shema means. Verse 9, he says, and you shall write them, verse 10, and it shall be when Yahweh your Elohim brings you into the land of which he swore to your fathers, to Abraham, to Yitzchak, to Yaakov, to give you great and good cities which you did not build, and houses filled with all kinds of goods which you did not fill, and wells dug which you did not dig, vineyards with and olive trees you did not plant, and you shall eat and be satisfied. Be on guard, lest you forget Yahweh who brought you out of the land of Mitzrayim, out of the house of bondage. Fear Yahweh your Elohim, serve him, swear by his name. Do not go after other mighty ones, the mighty ones of the peoples who are all around you. For Yahweh your Elohim is zealous to enforce what he says in your midst, lest the displeasure of Yahweh your Elohim burn against you. Then he shall destroy you from the face of the earth. Do not try Yahweh your Elohim as you tried him at Massah. Diligently guard the commands of Yahweh your Elohim, and his witnesses and his laws which he has commanded you. And you shall do what's right and good in the eyes of Yahweh, that it might be well with you. And you shall go in and possess the good land which Yahweh swore to your fathers. See, he says that you're going to end up in places where it's easy to get complacent because you're spoiled. We don't even realize how spoiled we are, especially here in the U.S., compared to a lot of places. We are so spoiled. And the more spoiled you are, the less you're going to look up. You know, you ever wonder why sometimes, why has things gotten so bad? Why are my finances so bad and my jobs are having problems and this? Because you're not looking up. If you had your focus vertically, then he could give you abundance. But when he gives you abundance, you stop looking up. If you can find a way to continuously look up and trust him, fear him, do what he says, just maybe he can give you the abundance and keep it for a while. But guess what? We get complacent. We forget and we become satisfied. Don't become satisfied. Always hunger and thirst after the word. He says, and you shall do what is right and good in the eyes of Yahweh, not right and good in your own eyes. This whole teaching we did called Whose Eyes Are You Right In? Go listen to that. He says that it might be well with you if you do what's right in his eyes. Remember what I said about telling the children, if you are on vacation, if you would listen to me, it would go well with you? That's what he's saying here. If you do what's right in his eyes, then it will be well with you when you go in to possess the land. And he says that he'll drive out the enemies from before you as he spoke in verse 19. And when your son asks, remember I said we're going to get to this verse, when your son asks you in the time to come, saying, what is the meaning of the witness and the laws and the right rulings which Yahweh your Elohim has commanded? In other words, why are you doing all these things? What's the meaning of all this? What's with this covenant and obedience and Torah thing? Then you shall tell them, and say to your son, we were slaves of Pharaoh in Egypt, Mitzrayim, and Yahweh brought us out of Mitzrayim with a strong hand. And Yahweh sent signs and wonders and great and grievous upon Mitzrayim, upon Pharaoh, and upon all the household, his household before our eyes. And he brought us out from there to bring us in, to give us the land of which he swore to our fathers. And Yahweh commanded us to do all these laws, to fear Yahweh our Elohim for our good always, to keep us alive as it is today. So when the children say, why are we doing this? You say, look, because we were under a slave taskmaster. By the way, this is what Paul talks about over and over again. There's the law of sin and death, and there's the law of life. And we talked about that in several of the teachings, comparing it. The law of our normal fleshly members is the law of sin and death. It leads to death. It leads to sin. It's not saying the Torah that is that. This is ridiculousness. Christianity has gotten that thing so completely wrong. You already have, as a default, a law ruling in your members called the law of sin and death. The way that seems right to a man leads to, well, there's that law playing out. Your way of seeing things leads to sin and death. He says, if you would seek life, then you would leave that. You know what? You are a slave to whom you serve, right? Sin. You can serve sin as a slave. Or you can serve Yahweh, Torah, and life. And that's what he's saying here. We were slaves in Mitzrayim. He brought us out and offered us a path to life. We're still slaves, but we're now slaves to the Elohim of the universe. He says, Yahweh commanded us to do all these laws, to fear Yahweh Elohim for our good always. They're for our good always. So when did they become the laws that are against us and awful and are terrible, blah, blah, blah? He said they're to keep us alive. What have I told you? To bless you, to keep you safe, as it is today. And look at this now. It is righteousness. We are called righteous. It is righteousness for us when we guard to do all this command before Yahweh or Elohim as he commanded us. It says that the righteous shall this and the righteous shall that. Well, now you know what righteous is. It is righteousness for us when we do this. This is what brings righteousness. There's a teaching we did called the pursuit of righteousness. Go listen to that. Let's continue. Chapter 8. We just might make it here. Guard to do, verse 1, guard to do every command which I command you today, that you might live and shall increase and go in and shall possess the land of which Yahweh swore to your forefathers. Man, I'm glad Moses said that, since he hasn't already said that 57 times. Are we getting a hint? And you shall remember, and he's not done, he's going to say it another 57 times. And you shall remember, remember I told you the focus was, he wants us to remember where we came from, remember where we are now and what we're supposed to be doing and where we're going. You shall remember that Yahweh your Elohim led you all the way these 40 years in the wilderness to humble you. Some of us are still stuck on that part. You're not letting him humble you. See, we're all going through our own wilderness. And for some of us, it's been a lot less than 40 years. Some of it's been more than 40 years. But if it's been taking longer, it's because you might have had a problem with part one, which is step one is humble. Humbling meaning you get off the throne of self-sovereignty and you let him reign and rule in your life. He said he led you in the wilderness to humble you, to prove you, to know what is in your heart, whether you guard his commands or not. Same thing. Where is your heart? He said, those people at Mount Sinai, their heart was not the right heart. He said, oh, that they would have a heart in them that was the right heart, a heart that would fear me, trust me, and follow in what I tell them to do. So it's a test. This is the Deuteronomy 8:2 test. This is what I preach. I've been doing this for, 17, 18 years now. I've been on the same thing. I don't remember when it started. I just know it seems like it's always been there. My focus has always been from Yahweh himself. I hope that I'm saying this right. Teach them the Deuteronomy 8:2 test. We all have to pass that test. That is the whole point of life, is to pass this test, to be humbled, and to prove whether it's in your heart to listen and obey. Are you listening? Are you listening? Verse 3, and he humbled you and let you suffer hunger and fed you with manna which you did not know, nor did your fathers know, to make you know that man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes forth from the mouth of Yahweh. So when you suffer, when there's lack, it's to humble you. So when you're suffering, it's not because you just don't have the right employment or the right job or you're bad at your budget. It could be because there's a humbling you're not paying attention to. By the way, all you parents with adult children, you may want to stop rescuing them. Maybe he's trying to humble them and get their attention and let them suffer so that they would also hear his voice in their fire. Oh, no, but we're so quick to rescue everybody. I get counseling sessions all the time with that. I can't believe some of the things parents are doing with their adult children, entitling and enabling and preventing them from hearing the voice. Let them suffer a little bit. They won't starve. They won't die. You're watching. If it really gets that bad, you'll jump in if you have to. But you're jumping in way too soon. Most of you jump in way too soon. He says, now listen, he says, because otherwise we're going to think that we can live by bread and not by every word. He says, your garments didn't wear out, nor did your foot swell, your shoes, nothing, I mean, your clothes, everything was great. He says, but you shall know in your heart, verse 5, that as a man disciplines his son, so Yahweh your Elohim disciplines you. That means it's out of love, to keep them safe, to raise them up in the way they should go. Therefore you shall guard the commands of Yahweh your Elohim, to walk in his ways and to fear him. Man, this guy's like a broken record, isn't he? For Yahweh your Elohim is bringing you into a good land, a land of streams of water, of fountains and springs that flow out of the valleys and hills, a land of wheat and barley, of vines and fig trees, pomegranates, olive oil, honey, a land in which you eat bread without scarcity, in which you do not lack at all, a land whose stones are iron and out of whose hills you dig copper. And you shall eat and be satisfied, and shall bless Yahweh your Elohim for the good land which he gives you. That's what he's expecting us to do. But also that discipline's got to come. He's got to discipline us, and you have got to stop preventing the opportunity for Abba to discipline your children. I'm talking about your children that are 25, 35, 45, and every number in between. Let's continue. Verse 11, be on guard lest you forget. There it is again. You're not just protecting and guarding, but be on guard against forgetting. If you're awake, paying attention, diligently observing and aware, then you won't forget. He says, be on guard lest you forget Yahweh your Elohim by not guarding his commands and his right rulings and his laws, which I command you today. By the way, do you love the way that Yahweh, through Moses, doesn't just say, keep the commandments? He wants to make sure he's covering all the categories. I want you to keep the right rulings, the commandments, the laws, the statutes, everything. No picking and choosing and just saying, I'm going to just keep the big 10. Lest you eat and shall be satisfied and build lovely houses and dwell in them, and your herds and your flocks increase, and your silver and your gold are increased, and all that you have is increased, that your heart becomes lifted up, and you forget Yahweh your Elohim, who brought you out of the land of Mitzrayim and from the house of bondage, who led you through the great and awesome wilderness, fiery serpents and scorpions and thirst, where there was no water, who brought water for you out of the flinty rock, who fed you in the wilderness with manna, which your fathers did not know, in order to humble you and to try you, to do you good in the end. All of this is to what? To do you good in the end. You know what? I was watching Fiddler on the Roof last night, as a matter of fact, and Tevye asked the question, would it be so awful if I had just a little wealth? And the answer is, it might. Now that I think about it, it might. Because if you had the wealth, would you still pay attention and listen? Would you guard? I can tell you right now, I've had many careers where I could have been and was on the level of being very wealthy. I was very good at what I did. I had career paths that could have made me very rich. And you know what? I would never be doing this if that was the case. And he knew that. So he never let me get that successful. Now, of course, at the time, it seemed like I was cursed or having some other issues. As a matter of fact, my wife was wondering if I was cursed. She was. And legitimately so. I was starting to wonder myself. But I came to understand, had he allowed all that to happen, I would have had the giant house with the big picket fence and the cars and the boats and all that, and I would never have been focusing on him. And so he's saying, look, be careful when he gives you all this abundance, because your heart can become lifted up and you're going to forget. Because you're going to start thinking that it's by your, he says, let's continue. He says here, and then you say in your heart, my power, my strength, and my hand made me this wealth. But you shall remember Yahweh your Elohim, for it is he who gives you the power to get the wealth, in order to establish his covenant. That's why you get the wealth, in order to establish his covenant, which he swore to your fathers today. Not just so you could be wealthy, but if he gives it to you when you're not ready, it's going to ruin you in a real way. Not in a present-day way. You'll probably be very happy with all your wealth in the flesh right now, but it's going to ruin you in the future. It's going to ruin you in your relationship with your Creator. It says, and it shall be, if you by any means forget Yahweh your Elohim and follow other mighty ones, and serve them and bow yourself to them, and I have warned you this day that you shall certainly perish. And that's going to be like the second death. We're talking about it's over, done. Like the nations which Yahweh is destroying before you, so you are to perish, because you did not obey the voice of Yahweh. Are you ready to listen? Okay, are you ready to listen? Are you listening? I mean, he's saying over and over and over again, if you would just listen, just listen. As a matter of fact, chapter 9, we're not going to read it, but the first words are, Hear, O Yisra'ЄL. Are you listening? Go to chapter 10 and verse 12. We're just going to make this. Go to chapter 10 and verse 12. And now, Yisra'ЄL, you guys should know, Deuteronomy 8:2 and Deuteronomy 10:12, we get there almost every teaching, right? And now, Yisra'ЄL, what is Yahweh your Elohim asking of you? Isn't that really the big question? What is he asking of you? Here's the shocker. You ready? It's very different than everything else Moses has said. To fear Yahweh your Elohim, to walk in all his ways, to love him, and to serve Yahweh your Elohim with all your heart and with all your being, to guard the commands of Yahweh and his laws, which I command you today for your good. I have no idea why the Scriptures version put the question mark at the end of that. It doesn't belong there at all. He says, to guard the commands I give you today, which are for your good. There's no punctuation, by the way, in the Hebrew. So they arbitrarily stuck a question mark there. I have no idea why. Okay, so what is Yahweh looking for you to do? If you're Israel, of course, you got to first figure out that you're Israel. Go watch the teaching series, or listen to the teaching series called Discovering Your Identity. Okay, but he says here, I want you to fear me, so fear of Yahweh teaching. Walk in all his ways, the walk in all his ways teaching. Love him, the love in Torah teaching, which we're going to probably redo. And serve him, well done and good trustworthy servant teaching. All these things are taught. Do you see why I teach the teachings I do? So you have all of these pieces of the puzzle. I don't just randomly teach stuff just to teach stuff. That's all these things. And you serve him with all your heart and with all your being. And then you're going to guard and obey them. Because why? Because they're for your good. They're for your good. See, the heavens and the heaven of heavens belong to Yahweh your Elohim. Also the earth, with all that is in it. Yahweh delighted only in your fathers to love them, and he chose their seed after them, you above all peoples, as it is today. And listen to verse 16. And you shall circumcise the foreskin of your heart and harden your neck no more. So for all those Christians out there, I'm not picking on you, but I am. Don't you tell me that circumcision of flesh was the Old Testament and circumcision of heart is the New, because both were always required. This is in Deuteronomy. Okay, and it says, and you shall circumcise the foreskin of your heart. There it is in Deuteronomy 10:16. And so that's critical. And harden your neck no more. Now, what is this idea of stiff-necked, hardened neck? See, you can't bow down if your neck is stiff. You can't actually bow your head and lower your head before an authority. So there's something about the foreskin of the heart being circumcised has to do with getting you out of the way. Circumcising the me out of there. The I, out of there. It's funny how no matter how often I do that, everybody still laughs. Maybe it's the same three people. Anyway, that's possible. But this is critical. Okay? He's saying, look, this is what it's all about. And he says this over and over and over and over and over. Let's go to Deuteronomy 30, and we're going to close this out. Deuteronomy chapter 30. And in verse 1, and it shall be when all these words come upon you, the blessing and the curse which I've set before you, and you shall bring them back to your heart among all the Gentiles where Yahweh your Elohim drives you, and shall turn back to Yahweh your Elohim and obey his voice. Are you listening? According to all that I command you today, with all your heart, with all your being, you and your children, then. Okay, you can't go further unless you do the everything before the then first. So stop right there in your life and make sure you did everything prior to the word then. Because then Yahweh your Elohim shall turn back your captivity and shall have compassion on you. And he shall turn back and gather you from all the peoples where Yahweh your Elohim has scattered you. If any of you are driven out to the furthest parts under the heavens, from there Yahweh your Elohim shall gather you. And from there he does take you. And Yahweh your Elohim shall bring you to the land which your fathers possessed. And you shall possess it. And he shall do good to you and increase you more than your fathers. And Yahweh your Elohim shall circumcise your heart and the heart of your seed to love Yahweh your Elohim with all your heart, with all your being, so that you might live. By the way, don't misunderstand when he says, and Yahweh shall circumcise your heart, or Yahweh shall put a new heart in you. He's not going to wave his magic wand or his hand or blast of his nostrils or whatever you want to picture. What he's going to do is cause you to go through circumstances where you choose to do these things. But he is actively going to interact with you to guide you down that path. So Yahweh is going to cause you to have those opportunities to see what you need to circumcise off your heart and the heart of your seed and to love him. He says, Yahweh Elohim shall put all these curses on your enemies and on those who hate you, who persecuted you. Verse 8, and you shall turn back and obey the voice. Are you listening? And do all his commands, which I command you today. And Yahweh your Elohim shall make you have excess in all your work of your hand, in the fruit of your body, in the fruit of your livestock, in the fruit of the ground for good. For Yahweh turns back to rejoice over you for good, as he rejoiced over your fathers. If you obey the voice of Yahweh your Elohim to guard his commands and his laws, which are written in this book of the Torah, if you turn back to Yahweh your Elohim with all your heart and with all your being. By the way, here Moses is referring to this book of the Torah. For all those Melchizedekian people saying the book of the law versus the book of the covenant, this is the book of the law. Everything Moses is saying has to do with the book of the law, which now the Melchizedekian people are claiming is done away with. Well, then you can forget about all these promises. Because he's saying, if you translate the word Torah there as law, it says, in this book of the law. If you turn back to Yahweh your Elohim with all your heart, with all your being, for this command which I'm commanding you today is not too hard for you, nor is it far off. It's not in the heavens to say, who shall ascend into the heavens for us, and bring it to us and cause us to hear it, so that we do it. Nor is it beyond the sea to say, who shall go over the sea for us and bring it to us and cause us to hear it, so that we do it. Notice that it keeps saying about causing us to hear it. You shouldn't need that, but he knows you do. He says, see, for the word is very near in your mouth and in your heart to do it. But unfortunately, we need those who cause us to hear it, to do it. See, I've set before you today life and good, death and evil, so that I am commanding you today to love Yahweh your Elohim, to walk in his ways, to guard his commands, his laws, and his right rulings, and you shall live and increase, and Yahweh your Elohim shall bless you in the land which you go to possess. But if your heart turns away, and you do not obey, and shall be drawn away, and shall bow down to other mighty ones, and serve them, I have declared to you today that you shall certainly perish. You shall not prolong your days in the land which you are passing over the Jordan, over the Jordan to enter and possess. I have called the heavens and the earth as witnesses today against you. I have set before you life and death, the blessing and the curse. Therefore, choose life, so that you live, both you and your seed, to love Yahweh your Elohim, to obey his voice, to cling to him, for he is your life and the length of your days, to dwell in the land which Yahweh swore to your fathers, to Abraham, to Yitzchak, and to Yaakov, to give to them. Amen. Amen. Are you listening? Moses said the same thing 14 different ways, over and over and over again, in just a few chapters. And by the way, it's not like he said it to them, and then a few years later he said it to them, and this is all one long sermon message, one long speech. And he says it over and over and over again. Are we listening? Are we hearing? Are we shemaying? And actually, when you say shemaying, it almost sounds like shemayim, which is the heavens. You see, it's an interesting little play on words there. Are you hearing? Are you listening? Let's pray. Avinu Malkeinu, our Father, our King. Father, we want to listen. We don't want to just hear, but we want to listen. We want to obey. Father, help us to hear your voice in our fires, in the darkness that we find ourselves in sometimes. Help us to truly prepare during these Yamim Norim, these days of awe. And the days of awe are not just the days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. They're all of the days of our life between when we were born and when we die. We should have these are all days of awe, where we are striving to pass the Deuteronomy 8:2 test, to be humble enough to be able to show and demonstrate that it's in our hearts to obey you, to hear you, and to listen and do what you've commanded to be done. Father, it is a challenge for us. We are flesh. We are weak. And yet we know if we can subjugate our own will and get out of the way and allow you to mold us, we can become transformed and conformed into the image of Yeshua. So, Father, we are coming to you now during these days and at this time, knowing that we are going through our own journeys, just like the Israelites did, that they are a type and shadow and metaphor of our own lives. Father, we ask that you would be there with us in the fire and in the darkness, and that you would help us to hear so that we might listen, and give us the strength and courage to listen so we might do, and then in doing we shall receive. And so, Father, we thank you, we bless you, we sing glory and honor to your holy name, in the name above all names, Yeshua, our Messiah. Amen. Amen. Amen.